On a seemingly ordinary Tuesday evening, Jason found himself in the quiet aisle of a deserted supermarket, staring at a wall of toothpaste. He'd always thought mint was the safest bet, but today, the neon pinks and electric blues called to him. The stark fluorescence buzzed overhead, casting an eerie glow that made him feel like he was in a sci-fi movie. A quick glance at his watch told him he had been wandering the aisles for an hour. The last time he was out alone was, well, he couldn't remember. Jason. A shrill voice pierced the silence, and he cringed. His wife's name was Rachel, but she had taken to calling him Jay in public. It was just one of the many little things she did to assert her dominance. They'd met at a mutual friend's party, bonding over their love of hiking and the outdoors. Rachel had been adventurous, a free spirit, and she had swept him off his feet with her fiery red hair and her laugh that could light up the darkest of caves. I said mint, Jay. Rachel's voice was like a whip cracking through the air. She strode towards him, her stiletto heels clicking sharply on the linoleum floor. He flinched at the sound, his body conditioned to respond to her commands. The first time she had slapped him was a shock, but now, after 5 long years of their twisted marriage, it had become a constant background noise. Summary 1. In a deserted supermarket aisle, Jason grapples with a simple toothpaste choice, reflecting on his controlled existence as a foot slave to Rachel, his dominant wife. They met at a party and bonded over shared interests, leading to a marriage where Rachel's fantasies transformed him into a submissive servant, subject to constant slaps and degradation. Rachel's voice echoes, demanding mint toothpaste, a stark reminder of his lost freedom and the rules governing their bizarre relationship dynamics. Yes, Rachel, he murmured, swapping the blue tube for mint. He knew better than to argue. Rachel had always had a penchant for control, but it was only after their wedding that she revealed her true nature. It started with small things, telling him what to wear, deciding their meals, and eventually, it grew into something more intense. Good boy, she purred, her eyes gleaming with a malicious satisfaction. The warmth of her breath sent a shiver down his spine. He had once found her attractive, but now, her beauty was tainted by the cruelty that lay beneath the surface. She reached out and grabbed a pack of gum from the shelf, popping a piece into her mouth before turning to him. Now, let's go home so you can start on dinner, she said, her voice a sweet caress that belied the iron fist in her velvet glove. The drive back was tense, Rachel's eyes flicking to the rearview mirror to ensure that Jay was following closely behind her. The car's leather seats were sticky with his anxiety, and the smell of her perfume suffocated him. It was the same scent that had once filled him with desire, now a constant reminder of his submission. Summary 1. Rachel's dominance over Jason intensified after their wedding, with her dictating his actions and choices, such as what to wear and what food to prepare. Her once attractive qualities now instill fear in him. The tension during their drive home underscores the power dynamics in their relationship, with Rachel's perfume serving as a suffocating reminder of his submission. Once they arrived at their suburban home, Rachel tossed her shoes at him, the heels digging into his chest as he caught them. Clean these, she ordered, strutting away. Her footsteps echoed through the hallway, the sound of her heels on the hardwood a stark reminder of his fate. Jay knelt and untied the laces, his heart racing as he took a deep breath, preparing himself for the task at hand. The leather was warm and slightly damp from her sweat, and he felt a twinge of revulsion as he brought them to his lips. But that was quickly replaced by fear of disappointing Rachel, fear of the punishment that awaited him if he didn't do a thorough job. He began to clean, his tongue sliding over the smooth leather, tasting the faint hint of dirt and the salty tang of her skin. Each swipe brought him closer to her power over him, and he felt his cock stir in his cage, the cruel reminder of his emasculation. As he worked, Rachel lounged on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Occasionally, she'd look up and smirk, watching him with a mix of amusement and contempt. You're getting better at this, Jay, she said, not bothering to hide the mockery in her voice. Maybe tonight, I'll let you earn your release. The promise was like a carrot on a stick, and he lapped at her feet with renewed vigor, eager for any scrap of affection or relief she might deign to give him. Summary 1. Rachel returns home and immediately orders Jason to clean her shoes, symbolizing his subservience. As he performs the degrading task, Rachel casually observes, offering a mocking compliment and a potential reward of sexual relief. His arousal, despite his situation, exemplifies the depth of his conditioning and her control. The kitchen timer beeped, and Rachel sighed, rising from her throne. "Dinner's ready," she announced, and Jay scurried after her, eager to serve. He'd learned the hard way that punctuality was key in their twisted dance of dominance and submission. Rachel took a seat at the table, her legs crossed, one foot resting on his back as he knelt beside her chair. The warmth from her soul seeped through his shirt, a stark contrast to the coldness in her eyes. "Now, tell me, Jay," she began, her voice deceptively sweet, "how was your little trip outside? Did you see anyone interesting?" The question was loaded, a trap waiting to be sprung, but he had learned to navigate her games. "No, Rachel," he replied meekly. "I just focused on getting your shopping done." Her foot pressed harder into his back, and he felt the weight of her displeasure. "Good," she said, her voice low and threatening. "Remember, you're mine, and you don't need anyone else." Jason nodded, his cheek pressing against the cool floor. "Yes, Rachel," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I'm yours." The evening wore on, a tapestry of degradation and servitude. He served her dinner, cleaned up the dishes, and endured her endless demands without a word of protest. Rachel's fantasies had transformed their marriage into a prison, one he could never escape from. But as he knelt before her, cleaning her feet, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of belonging, a twisted love for the woman who had shackled him to this life of submission. It was all he knew now, and the thought of a world beyond her control was as terrifying as the slaps that still stung on his cheeks. "Now, let's see if you've learned your lesson," Rachel said, her voice like honeyed venom. She unlocked the chastity device that kept him perpetually frustrated, and he felt a rush of both relief and dread. The cage came off with a clink, and his cock sprang free, hard and desperate. "You may come on my feet," she allowed, her tone dripping with condescension. "But remember, you are not to touch yourself unless I say so." Jason's eyes glazed over with need as he obeyed, his cock pulsing in time with his racing heart. He climaxed onto her bare feet, the warmth of his seed mixing with the salty taste of her skin. Rachel watched him with a smug smile, her power over him never more apparent. "Lick it clean," she ordered, and he did so eagerly, his tongue tracing the contours of her toes, savoring every drop. Once the ritual was complete, Rachel stood, her feet gleaming. She stepped away from him, leaving him kneeling on the floor, panting and spent. "Good boy," she said, her voice devoid of affection. "Now, go to your corner. We'll see if you can behave tomorrow." Jason retreated to his designated space, his eyes never leaving hers. The corner was cold and unforgiving, but it was his, a space where he could be alone with his thoughts. He curled up on the floor, his body slick with sweat and cum, and waited for the punishment that was sure to come. Rachel's whims were unpredictable, and he knew better than to test her patience. As the house grew quiet, he thought back to their honeymoon, the last time he had felt truly free. They had hiked through the mountains, Rachel's laugh echoing through the valleys as they explored the wilderness together. But even then, there had been moments, subtle hints of what was to come. The way she had looked at him, the way she had taken charge, leaving him to follow in her footsteps. It had been thrilling then, a dance of equals, but now, it was a march towards oblivion. He closed his eyes, trying to ignore the ache in his jaw from her slaps. The silence was broken only by Rachel's occasional footsteps as she patrolled the house, ensuring his compliance. The world outside called to him, a siren song of freedom and autonomy, but it was a world he could never return to. The bars of his gilded cage were invisible but unyielding, and Rachel was the only key. As he drifted into a fitful sleep, he couldn't help but wonder if there was a way to break free, to find the love and respect he had once dreamed of. Or if he was doomed to live out his days as her devoted foot slave, serving her every whim without question or hesitation. But for now, all he could do was wait for the sun to rise, and the cycle to begin anew. The next morning, Rachel's stiletto heels clicked down the hallway, jolting him awake. He scurried to his designated spot at the foot of their bed, his heart racing. "Good morning, Rachel," he murmured, keeping his eyes on the floor. Look at me when you speak to me, Rachel barked, and he obeyed, his gaze flicking up to meet hers. Her eyes were cold and assessing, her lips curled in a smirk. Did you have sweet dreams, Jay? He swallowed hard. Yes, Rachel, he lied, hoping she wouldn't see the doubt in his eyes. Rachel knew his thoughts were a treacherous place, filled with desires she had long ago crushed under her heel. Tell me, what did you dream about? She demanded, her foot sliding off the bed and onto his face. He inhaled deeply, the scent of her feet filling his nostrils. Tell me, or I'll make you regret it. Jason's mind raced, searching for a lie that would satisfy her. I dreamt of serving you breakfast in bed, he murmured, his voice muffled by her toes. Rachel's smirk grew wider, and she lifted her foot, allowing him to breathe. Good boy, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Now, go make it a reality. The rest of the day passed in a blur of chores and humiliation. Rachel had him clean the house from top to bottom, scrubbing floors, washing windows, and even cleaning the toilets with his bare hands. She watched him with a cruel glint in her eye, enjoying his suffering. But amidst the drudgery, Jason felt a spark of rebellion ignite within him. He knew he had to tread carefully, but he couldn't help but think of ways to push back against her dominance. It was a dangerous game, but the thought of reclaiming even a semblance of his lost manhood was intoxicating. As he worked, he observed Rachel's routines, looking for any crack in her armor. That evening, Rachel decided to take a bath, leaving him to his thoughts. He sat in the corner of the bathroom, his eyes on her reflection in the steamy mirror. She had never been more beautiful, but now her beauty was marred by the monster she had become. He watched as she lounged in the tub, her legs splayed wide, the water lapping at her shaved mound. An idea began to form in his mind, a desperate plan to regain some semblance of control. He waited, his heart pounding, until Rachel called for him to scrub her back. He approached the tub, his hand shaking slightly, and picked up the loofah. As he began to rub her skin, he noticed the drain plug was loose. With a quick glance to make sure Rachel wasn't watching, he nudged it open just a crack. The water began to slowly drain out of the tub, and a wicked smile spread across his face. This was his chance, however small it might be. He would make her regret turning him into her plaything. The water level dropped, and Rachel sat up, a frown marring her perfect features. What's happening? She snapped, her eyes narrowing. I don't know, Jason stammered, feigned innocence in his voice. Rachel glared at him, and he could see the wheels turning in her head. She knew he was up to something. But she didn't suspect the truth, that he was plotting his escape, one tiny act of defiance at a time. The tension in the room grew thick, like a noose tightening around his neck. Rachel slid out of the tub, her body glistening with water and soap. You're going to pay for this, she hissed, her voice a serpent's whisper. Jason felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. For the first time in years, he had done something she didn't expect. It was a small victory, but it was a start. He took a deep breath, ready to face whatever punishment she had in store. But in the back of his mind, the spark of rebellion grew stronger. He had tasted freedom, and he wasn't going to let it slip away so easily. Rachel stormed out of the bathroom, her wet footsteps leaving a trail of water. Jason took the opportunity to replace the plug, his heart racing. He knew he had to be careful, one wrong move and she'd snatch away any hope of escape. But as he cleaned up the mess, an idea began to form. Maybe, just maybe, he could use her own games against her. When Rachel returned, she was dressed in a silk robe that clung to her curves, her hair wrapped in a towel. She looked at him with a mix of annoyance and curiosity. You're going to pay for that, she said, her voice low and menacing. Jason's stomach clenched, but he kept his eyes down. How can I make it up to you, Rachel? He asked, his voice meek. Rachel's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, he thought she'd see through his act. But instead, she smirked. You can start by giving me a foot massage, she said, sinking her feet into the plush chair cushion. And maybe, if you're good, I'll consider letting you out of the house for a little while. Jason's heart leapt at the prospect of freedom, but he knew better than to show it. He took Rachel's feet in his hands, his thumbs pressing into her arches as he began to rub. He had become an expert at reading her moods, and he knew she was testing him. But he was determined to play along, to bide his time. As Rachel's breathing deepened, he began to feel a sense of power. It was subtle, but it was there. He was the one bringing her pleasure now, and he could feel her grip on him loosening slightly. It was a heady feeling, one he hadn't felt in so long. Days turned into weeks, and Jason continued his subtle acts of defiance. Each time Rachel took her foot out of the tub, he'd leave the plug just a little more open. Each time she threw her shoes at him, he'd clean them with a touch more tenderness, whispering sweet nothings to her feet as he worked. It was a dangerous dance, but one he felt more and more confident in each day. One night, Rachel called him into the bedroom, a glint in her eye. "I have a surprise for you," she said, her voice filled with glee. She held up a set of handcuffs, and his stomach dropped. But as she approached him, he saw an opportunity. He took a deep breath and stepped closer, his hand sliding up her leg, his voice a soft purr. "Let me put them on for you," he suggested, his voice filled with a newfound confidence. Rachel's eyes widened in surprise, but she didn't protest. He took the cuffs from her hand and gently locked them around her ankles, his eyes never leaving hers. For a moment, she was caught off guard, and Jason felt the balance of power shift. But Rachel was too clever to let it go unchallenged. She leaned back, her hands bound to the bedpost, and smirked up at him. "Now what, Jay?" she taunted. "What are you going to do with me?" The question hung in the air, heavy with challenge. Jason knew he had to make his move, to take the power she had stolen from him. He leaned down and whispered in her ear, his voice filled with a newfound strength. "I'm going to make you beg for what you've been taking from me." With a swiftness she didn't anticipate, he grabbed a blindfold and secured it over her eyes. Rachel's breath hitched, and for the first time in years, Jason felt in control. He kissed her neck, his teeth grazing her skin, and she squirmed beneath him. "Please, Jay," she whimpered, but it was a plea for more, not less. He took his time, exploring her body with his mouth and hands, teasing and tormenting. Rachel's moans grew louder, her body arching off the bed. And when he finally entered her, it was with a fierce possession that left them both trembling. Afterwards, as Rachel lay there, panting and spent, Jason whispered in her ear. "Remember this feeling." What do you mean?" Rachel's voice was shaky, unsure. He leaned in closer, his breath warm against her skin. "This is what I want from you," he said, his voice firm. "Respect. Equality. Love." Rachel pulled away from him, the handcuffs clinking against the bedpost as she sat up. "You think you can just take this from me?" she snarled, her eyes flashing with anger. But there was something else there, something that looked a lot like fear. Jason took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers. "I'm not taking anything," he said calmly. "I'm just asking for what's rightfully mine." The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with the scent of their passion and her fury. Rachel stared at him, her chest heaving, and for a moment, Jason thought she might attack him. But then, she sank back onto the bed, the fight leaving her. "Fine," she spat. "But don't think this changes anything." Jason didn't respond. He knew it was a small victory, but it was a start. He unlocked the handcuffs and massaged her feet, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. Rachel didn't pull away, and for the first time in years, their interaction didn't feel forced. The days that followed were tense, a delicate dance of power and submission. Rachel tested him at every turn, pushing his boundaries and watching for any signs of weakness. But Jason held firm, refusing to let her break him. He continued his subtle acts of rebellion, each one a declaration of his humanity. One afternoon, Rachel called him into the living room, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Look what I bought," she said, holding up a pair of shiny new stilettos. "Aren't they beautiful?" Jason looked at them, his stomach clenching. The sight of those heels had once filled him with dread, but now, he saw them as a symbol of his imprisonment. "They're lovely," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Rachel slipped them on, her foot tapping impatiently. "Now, lick them clean," she ordered. He took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers. "No," he said simply. Rachel's face contorted with rage, and for a moment, he thought she might strike him, but then, she paused. Fine, she hissed. But you'll pay for this later. Jason nodded, his heart racing. It was a risk, but he had to take it. He knew Rachel wouldn't change overnight, but maybe, just maybe, he could chip away at her control until she saw him as an equal. As Rachel stormed off to her office, he felt a sense of liberation wash over him. He had stood up to her, and she hadn't broken him. It was a small step, but it was progress. Over the following weeks, Rachel's punishments grew harsher, but so did Jason's resolve. Each time she slapped him or denied him his release, he felt a little piece of his soul flicker back to life. He was no longer just her foot slave, he was a man fighting for his dignity. One evening, Rachel called him into the bedroom, a strange look on her face. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice hesitant. "Maybe we should talk." Jason's heart skipped a beat. Could this be the moment he'd been waiting for? The moment she admitted their relationship had gone too far? He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. Rachel took a deep breath, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "I know I've been harsh with you," she said, her voice softening. "But I just wanted to feel in control, you know?" Jason nodded again, his throat tight. "I understand," he said. "But I need more than that. I need you to see me as an equal." Her eyes searched his face, looking for something. Then, she nodded, slowly. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'll try." It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And for Jason, it was more than he had dared hope for. Rachel had agreed to change, to try for something better between them. The air in the house was still thick with tension, but it was a different kind of tension now. It was the tension of two people feeling their way through a minefield, trying not to set off an explosion. For the next few days, Rachel made an effort. She didn't slap him as often, and she allowed him to eat dinner at the table with her, instead of kneeling at her feet. They even had a conversation that didn't revolve around her demands or his submission. It was awkward and stilted, but it was a conversation. Jason knew it would be a long road to recovery, if there was even such a thing. But he was determined to walk it. He began to take better care of himself, showering more often, shaving, even wearing the clothes he liked. Rachel noticed the changes in him, and for the first time in a long time, he saw a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. One night, as they lay in bed, Rachel rolled over to face him. "Jason," she said softly. "I'm sorry." The words were like a balm to his soul. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I know," he said. "But we both have to work at this." Rachel nodded, her eyes searching his. "I want to," she whispered. "I just don't know how." They talked late into the night, sharing their fears and their desires. Rachel spoke of her need to feel in control, the fear that had driven her to take away his freedom. Jason talked about his longing for respect and intimacy. It was raw and painful, but it was honest. In the weeks that followed, Rachel made a concerted effort to be more considerate. She didn't order him around as much, and she even started asking for his opinion on things. They watched movies together, cooked meals as a couple, and even went for a walk in the park, his first time outside in 5 years. But it wasn't all roses. Rachel had moments of relapse, her temper flaring when things didn't go her way. And Jason had moments of anger and resentment, his old life feeling like a distant memory. But they worked through it, together. One evening, Rachel approached him with a serious look on her face. "I want to take the chastity key off," she said, holding up the small silver object. "I don't want to control you like that anymore." Jason felt a rush of emotions, relief, hope, and a hint of fear. Could he trust her? Would she take it back the moment he was no longer her captive? He took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay." The key turned in the lock with a satisfying click, and the cage fell away. Rachel took his cock in her hand, her eyes never leaving his. "It's yours again," she said, her voice trembling. They made love that night, slow and gentle, rediscovering each other's bodies. It was a moment of true connection, a promise of what could be. The months rolled on, and the dynamic between them shifted. Rachel still had her moments of dominance, but they were now a choice, a game they played when they both wanted it. And Jason found that, in those moments, he could still find pleasure, a twisted kind of power in his submission, but there were also moments of true partnership, of laughter and shared jokes. Rachel even started to take an interest in his life outside of serving her, asking about his hobbies and his thoughts. It was as if a door had been unlocked, and light was finally shining into the dark corners of their relationship. The house no longer felt like a prison, but a home. And while the scars of his captivity would always be with him, Jason found that he was beginning to heal. Rachel was still Rachel, but she was also becoming someone new, someone he could love again, and as they lay in bed, Rachel's head on his chest, he knew that their story was far from over. It was just beginning to be written on a new page, one where they both had the power to choose their roles. And maybe, just maybe, they could find a balance, a place where love and power didn't have to be at odds. The next morning, Rachel made him breakfast in bed, a rare and delightful surprise. The eggs were perfectly scrambled, the toast just right, and the coffee was hot and strong. "Thank you," he murmured, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're welcome," she said, her voice still holding a hint of shyness. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to him. They ate in companionable silence, the weight of their past hanging in the air, but not suffocating them as it once had. As Rachel cleared the plates, she turned to him with a sly smile. "What do you want to do today?" she asked, the mischief in her eyes reminding him of the woman he had fallen in love with. Jason's heart raced as he considered the question. The world outside was vast and intimidating, a place he hadn't stepped foot in for so long. Rachel's smile grew as she watched him, the anticipation playing out across her features. "We could go for a drive," he suggested tentatively, the words feeling strange in his mouth. Her eyes lit up at the idea. "Really?" she exclaimed, the excitement in her voice a stark contrast to her usual dominance. "But you haven't left the house in years. Are you sure you're ready?" "Yes," he said firmly, surprising himself with his resolve. Rachel nodded, her expression a mix of excitement and concern. She went to her closet and pulled out a pair of jeans and a t-shirt for him to wear, clothes that were surprisingly clean and well kept despite his long absence from the outside world. He dressed quickly, the fabric feeling foreign against his skin. They walked out to the garage, Rachel's hand in his, and she handed him the keys to her sports car. The metal was cool in his palm, a symbol of the freedom she was granting him. The garage door opened with a rumble, revealing the sunlit world beyond. For a moment, he felt paralyzed, the fear of the unknown threatening to swallow him whole. But Rachel's hand squeezed his reassuringly, and he took a deep breath. As they drove, Rachel pointed out landmarks they had passed countless times in the early days of their relationship. Each one brought a flood of memories, both good and bad. The park where they had had their first kiss, the restaurant where he had proposed, the spot where she had revealed her true nature to him. The city had changed in his absence, but the bond between them remained the same. They drove for hours, Rachel letting him take the wheel, her feet on the dash, her confidence in him unwavering. As they cruised through the streets, the wind in their hair, Jason felt a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in what felt like an eternity. Rachel didn't command him, she didn't slap him or demand his servitude. They were simply a couple enjoying a day together. But as the sun began to set, Rachel's demeanor changed. She sat up straight, her eyes taking on a predatory glint. "Pull over," she ordered, her voice a low growl. Jason did as he was told, his stomach fluttering with a mix of excitement and dread. She stepped out of the car, her bare feet on the pavement, and gestured for him to follow. He knew what was coming, but he didn't resist. Rachel had made it clear that she was still in charge, that their dynamic hadn't disappeared entirely. He got out of the car and followed her to the side of the road, his heart pounding in his chest. "Kneel," she said, and he did so, his knees hitting the pavement with a jolt. Rachel stepped closer, her feet in front of his face. "Lick them clean," she instructed, her voice a seductive purr. And as he obeyed, the world around them fading away, Jason realized that their journey was far from over. They had merely turned a new page, one where the lines between love and control were still being drawn, but this time, it was a dance they both knew the steps to, a dance they performed willingly. Rachel's toes curled in pleasure as his tongue traced the arch of her foot, and she couldn't help but feel a twinge of something softer than power. It was a feeling she hadn't allowed herself in years, tenderness. And as she looked down at him, she saw not just a foot slave, but a man she had once cherished. "Good boy," she murmured, and the words were almost a caress. "You've learned your place." Jason didn't look up, his eyes closed in concentration. But in his heart, he knew he had more than just a place. He had a voice, a say in their future. And as Rachel climbed back into the car, her hand lingering on his head, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to live together, as partners rather than master and servant. The drive home was quiet, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional slap of Rachel's bare foot against his cheek. But it wasn't a punishment anymore, it was a reminder of the connection they still shared, a bond that had survived the darkest of times. As they pulled into the driveway, Rachel turned to him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome home," she said, her voice filled with a mix of affection and dominance. And as they stepped into the house, Jason knew that their homecoming was more than just a return to the same four walls. It was a return to a relationship that had been broken and twisted, but was slowly, painfully, being put back together. The nights that followed were a mix of the old and the new. Rachel still demanded his service, but there was a gentleness in her touch that hadn't been there before. And Jason found that he could give it willingly, without the bitter taste of resentment. They were rediscovering each other, finding a balance in a world that had long been off kilter, and as Rachel straddled him, her feet pressing into his chest, he didn't feel trapped. He felt alive. The power she wielded was a game now, a dance they both enjoyed. Her moans of pleasure were his reward, the taste of her skin on his lips a sweet victory. In the quiet moments before sleep claimed them, Rachel whispered, "Thank you, Jason," and he knew she meant it. They had come so far, and there was still so much work to do. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like they were moving forward together. The house was no longer a prison, but a place of refuge. And as Rachel's heel dug into his back, guiding him to the corner of the bedroom where he slept, he knew that the next day would bring more challenges, more growth, and hopefully, more love. The door to their bedroom closed with a soft click, and he curled into his designated spot, his mind racing with thoughts of the future. It was a future filled with uncertainty, but it was theirs to write. Their story didn't end here, in the shadow of her dominance. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where they both had the power to choose their roles. And as the darkness enveloped him, Jason felt a strange sense of peace. He was Rachel's foot slave, yes, but he was also her partner in this twisted dance of power and submission. And maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to make it beautiful.